It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in to Take Command podcast with Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman, and no, if you're watching on YouTube, we didn't plan our blue shirts.
It looks good though. I mean, like, it looks good. Do you have a hoodie on yours? Is that like
I do. It's a little
like a running
very
thing.
light hoodie, kind of meant to be UV proof.
That's so smart.
Go for a run, etc. Because that was my plan for potentially after we get done here, and then we're dog sitting, so I went to take the dog out this morning, and I realized it was raining, and that's a stupid plan. So I got to figure out that later, but that's okay. As we record this, it's currently not the greatest weather day in Washington, D.C., but that's just fine. It's sunshine and rainbows, Logan, because we are almost at the NFL draft. And because we have our second straight amazing A-plus NFL draft guest, the author of The Beast, Dane Brugler, the Athletics lead draft analyst, is going to join us in just a few minutes.
You have been killing the guests, by the way, because I don't do anything with the guests. Craig is just grinding, getting all the guests for the podcast, which is great. So good job, Craig.
Yeah. By the way, I need you to text me and after this and confirm, or maybe we'll just talk before we get joined by Dane to confirm time for Mike Golick Jr., who's going to join us, and then I think Charles Davis has agreed to come on the show as well. So we'll do those two later in the week / early next week, and then one more mock draft, Logan, and then it's draft day.
And thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's only so many ways you can say the same thing over and over again, and we're definitely giving it our best shot right now. But I just can't wait to see what the team actually does. It's getting to that point. Like, I become a fan of the draft and a fan of the process, and now I just want to – it's like Christmas. I want to know what happens, so.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like everyone in the draft community is that way. And we talked about this a little bit, I think before our chat with Mina, of like how it feels like everyone's kind of at the end of the rope here. I think the closer it becomes, the more you just want to know. But we literally got a couple of we talked about it, and then we got some unsolicited texts from people. I don't know whether they listened to the show and then or they just also felt the same way, where people were like, "Are you guys exhausted yet?" And it's like, yeah, we are. True.
Like, I mean, I think that's.
I do love it though.
I love this
not
process.
Complaining.
I love this process. It's the best job ever. We just talking to microphones about the draft, which is like what I wanted to do when I was little, with regards to the draft. But like, there's so many guys, there's so many like opportunities to revisit the film. And it's like, you've watched the same thing 5 or 6 times on the same prospect, and you're coming to different conclusions. And I think I heard Daniel Jeremiah or Bucky Brooks on that Move the Sticks podcast, which I think is great content, by the way. One of the things they said, it's like, you just got to go back to the beginning and what your original evaluation was and stick to that before all this noise and before everybody was able to give your opinion. And I think there's a lot of merit to that, so I think, maybe just go back to my original notes and say, hey, what did I say then? And see where I'm at now. And hopefully it's not too different. So,
yeah, that kind of gets into what I want to talk about here before we get, Dane joins us, which is that the process itself and specific to different positions, because, the idea that and I'll just kind of talk through why I want to ask this question, because I let people know like how I got here, right? I think specific to quarterback this time around, I have thought more about what makes a great quarterback in the NFL more than I ever have in my entire life, because that's what mostly I've been talking about for 4 months is the Commanders have a choice to make at quarterback. And what does it mean to make a good choice? We're not going to know until years from now. But if we look at the best quarterbacks in the league, and I thought like Mina put it really well, they're like big traitsy quarterbacks who have second reaction ability. And like, that's kind of the in vogue model right now. But the previous 2 decades were dominated by Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Drew Brees, who were not that type of quarterback, who were like, I talked on the radio show the other day. Would you rather have Kirk Cousins plus or Justin Herbert light? It's kind of a hypothetical comparison of, say, Drake May and J.J. McCarthy, but really focusing more on the archetype. And there's plenty of precedent in the NFL history for some levels of both. Because really, like, depending on how plus you go, Kirk Cousins plus is Drew Brees or Tom Brady. Yeah. And, Justin Herbert light is a bunch of guys that haven't really worked out in the league. But now the league seems to be trending towards the traits. And I was like, okay, I've thought all of this about quarterback. what about the rest of the positions? And
Yeah.
is there like a historical precedent for some scouts being really good at some positions and not so much at others? Because that would make all the sense in the world, which is what makes this process so fascinating, but also so difficult. Is traits might work at one position, production at another. This translates here, but it doesn't translate there. That's kind of the ruminating thought in my head, Logan. And I'm sure you spent plenty of time thinking about this as well.
I think the quarterback thing, let's start there, and then we'll kind of work our way back to some of the other positions. I think is really interesting because I think when you look at NFL defenses currently, man, they're really, really challenging to diagnose pre-snap. Like as offense has gotten better, defenses just keep getting smarter. Everyone talks about the Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley kind of defenses that are like this amorphous coverage structures in the back. They're kind of quarters, they're kind of cover six, they're kind of man, and it makes it really hard. Now, we had Matt Ryan on here, and he kind of mentioned that how that becomes really, really challenging. And so what I think is that these tools and these traits just help quarterbacks overcome some of that indecision. So like I think when you look at Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Drew Brees, like they were excellent above the neck and they were elite in that area, and it allowed them to process. And now I think because the processing pre and post snap has become so much more challenging, I think just having a little bit of Patrick Mahomes, a little bit Lamar Jackson, a little bit of Josh Allen back there helps elevate the offense. Like we talked about this a lot with Daniel Jones because he's obviously in the division. But being able to steal a possession, or extend a possession, like by gaining an extra third down, whether it's through the legs or an off-schedule play, is worth its weight in gold at this point in the NFL. You just got to stay on the field and get that defense nice and tired. So I think that's why those traits become so important. And I think, like Mina brought it up, like the guy with the traits in that second group is Drake May. And that's why people get excited about him. I think that's honestly why we're excited about him to a certain extent. But you got to say, like, does he do the basic stuff well? And I think that's like where the quarterback in terms of evaluation becomes so complicated, because there's a physical element, there's a mental element, there's a leadership element, there's a interpersonal relationship element that is unlike any other position on the field. And I think that's why quarterback specifically, I think the NFL is bad at evaluating the position, but I think everybody's bad at evaluating the position because there's so many variables, and because it's probably the most like human position, the most interpersonal like human position, and that's why it becomes so hard to evaluate, I think.
Well, yeah, but it's also the most like mental of the positions, right? So your arm length and stuff you can say for offensive tackle, I need you to have X long arms, I need you to bench press this much, and like there's a physical prerequisite to the position that is really the crux of it. Like there is, of course, a mental aspect to every position on the football field, but the mental load, the neural load is so much lower at every position that is not quarterback. Now that is changing to an extent, I think, for, as these coverage structures get more complex, receivers need to read that stuff. DBs need to be able to understand where they're supposed to go within those coverage structures. So like everything in the passing game is more complicated than it used to be. In most schemes, offensively and defensively, but that most heavily and unduly falls on the quarterback. And there isn't necessarily measurables. Like there's prerequisite measurables. Nate talks about the 205 pounds. Obviously, the taller you are, the easier it is to see over the line. We saw that last year at times with Sam Howell versus Jacoby Brissett, and have seen it throughout NFL history. But there is not a physical stature and set of measurables that is the most important thing compared to your mental processing speed and the interpersonal skills like you talk about with quarterback. That said, every other position, there is a lot of that. And it comes up in ways you don't even think about. Speaking of Nate, Robert Mays and Dane were talking about running backs last week on the Athletic Football Show. And they talked about how Blake Corum has short arms, and where like you wouldn't think that matters a ton for a running back, but it matters in pass pro. Because all of a sudden, like you see him get eaten up at times in pass protection, or you see that with backs in the past, and you go, oh, arm length matters for running backs in a way that I didn't think about, because you just think about, can they run or not, or can they catch or not. And so I think when we think about all these positions, and we spend all this time thinking about quarterback here in Washington, because they have the number 2 pick and they need one, like the ability for scouts to have that same checklist for other positions, knowing it's a different checklist, I think is kind of just a fascinating thing. And maybe why some teams are really good at one position and not so good at others is because they've got the formula right on one, but not the others.
Yeah, and I think, maybe the simplest position or the position I think is like the hardest juxtaposition with quarterback is like defensive end or edge rusher. And the formula there is pretty straightforward. Like, are you fast? Do you have a minimum threshold arm length? Do you have a minimum threshold size like position? And are you twitched up and athletic? And then were you productive in college? Those like physical things coupled with a production element. I mean, I don't want to say it's 100%, but it's very, very high. Like if you can get a guy who's twitched up and then productive in college, like they're going to be good at the NFL. Like that's why Latu is such an interesting prospect, because he's like a medium level athlete, not a bad, not a good, but he is excellent. He's excellent in the production category. And then you compare him to a guy like Miles Cole from Texas Tech, who is literally like one of the freakiest dudes I've ever seen, like in person. He's got 36-inch arms, which is very long arms. He's 280 pounds. He's 6'6". He ran a 4.6 at the combine, so tremendous measurables, but his production was way down. So that's one where it's like the formula is not complete, so he becomes a little bit more of a risky evaluation. And it's one of the things that people talk about with Chop Robinson, for example. He's incredibly traitsy and toolsy and explosive, and he's got that athletic juice you're looking for, but it didn't always translate to production. Now, I think you want to bet on those types of traits specifically because you see more consistent flashes than a guy like Miles Cole. But to me, that's the formula. Unlike quarterback, where there's like this list of 7 to 10 items you need to be checking off, edge rusher, to me, it's pretty straightforward. And it's not going to be a 100% hit rate, but it's definitely helpful to be like, do they have these two things? If it's yes, and if one of them's a maybe, then you're like, this, I feel very comfortable about this pick. And I think that's like the antithesis, in my opinion, of quarterback evaluation from a football standpoint. So,
when you think of the different positions, do you have like a hierarchy from actually here, let's do this. 1 to 10. 10 is like, let's go 10 is the hardest. 1 is the easiest. I'm just going to name off a position where you think it's hard versus easy to evaluate. Quarterback, I'm guessing that's a 10.
10. And it's just and part of it is because like there's no parachute for it. Like we'll talk about some other positions there, but offensive line, like you draft a left tackle, they can move in a guard. A bad edge rusher is, if they can set an edge like versus the run, they're still going to be in the NFL. But if you're bad at quarterback, like it's like, bye, we're going to look for the next one. Like there's just no floor to it that gives you any type of parachute. So
yeah, running back.
Running back is, I think, pretty easy, relatively speaking, because you look like, how do you catch the football? Are you fast? Are you explosive? How's your contact balance? And if you have those traits, like you're good. And I do think the other thing about running back that's important is you don't need to hit on like this bell cow back. You don't need like a Derrick Henry. You need a guy who's going to fill a role for you on your team. And so you can say, as long as the coaches understand that, Ray Davis is a good first and second down runner, the guy from Kentucky, then he's going to be a good pro, right? Like that's the floor is very high for him. But if the coach tries to get him to do something that he's not accustomed to, then that's it.
Yeah, no, and obviously there's always the make it right versus get it right part of this as well. Wide receiver.
Wide receiver, very similar to running back in that, like, you have to kind of know what you're getting, and styles make fights, right? Stylistically, does this player fit with our offensive vision, and does the coach understand what they do well? Like, what is their superpower? Like, I love when I hear Dan say that, because with receivers, like, you have 5 of them, and it's like, this can be our deep ball guy, this can be our underneath guy, and if we put you in the right situation, you're going to be successful. So receivers are a little bit more challenging because you have to understand, like, do they have the route running nuance? But again, if you know what you're looking for, I think that becomes relatively obvious. So,
all right. And quickly through these last couple, because we got to talk to Dane Brugler here. Tight end.
Tight end, I go up and down on that because it really is like dependent on the team, and it's like
harder. It'd probably be like an 8 versus receiver.
I'd say like
a 5,
like a 7 maybe. It's not impossible, but it's tough because, again, you're running into what kind of scheme are they going to, what role they're going to have. But again, you're looking for toughness, athletic traits, same type of thing as a receiver. It's just a little bit more nuanced because of the blocking element.
I feel like O-line's like a 3 because of the parachute element.
The parachute element for sure, and it's like. But again, like depending on who you talk to, they're looking for different things. I'll give it like a 5 or a 4, just because like I look for athletic foot speed, I look for arm length, I look for toughness. I think everybody looks for that, but some people value Amarius Mims over Troy Fautanu. I tend to be more of a Troy Fautanu guy because the foot speed I think gets you out of stuff and lets you play guard if you need to, gives you that flexibility. So little bit styles make fights, but I enjoy evaluating that position. So to me, it's not that hard.
We talked about D-line already. It's actually pretty straightforward. Yeah. Linebacker.
This is really hard. I think it's very, very hard. I've missed on a bunch of linebackers just because you value, one year you're valuing above the neck, and then the next year you value physical traits, and you're
somehow wrong both years.
Yeah, you need both, and they need to kind of just have the right mental makeup. So,
and then corner safety.
I think those are really hard, man. Really, they're not a 10 because it's not a quarterback, but it's definitely like a 9 because they just are not around the football that much, and they're so scheme dependent. And I think that's why they're really challenging. And if you put those guys out of a role at all, I mean, obviously you got your Sauce Gardners or your elite, Surtans, the guys that can kind of do whatever. But man, it is challenging with some of those guys. So.
And yet, Dane Brugler evaluates them all and then writes a 324-page draft guide. The Athletics senior NFL draft analyst joins us next. Our guest today is the Athletics senior NFL draft analyst, but the better introduction is he's the author of The Beast. 324-page draft guide available now on The Athletic. It is so good. You get to dive into the prospect stories, and you got all the measurables, and you have literally any piece of information that you could want in print. It's Dane Brugler. Dane, thanks so much for doing this, man. What a week it is for you, and we appreciate some of your time during it.
No, I appreciate you having me on. It's been a fun week to share it with everybody. It's 18 months in the making, working on this thing, and so to finally be able to present it to the world, and the feedback's been awesome. There's something in here for everybody. If you're a diehard draft fan, if you're just a casual draft fan, there's something in here that will be of interest. Everything from the stats, the metrics, to the background information. A lot of people love to dive into that. That's my favorite part, just to learn where these guys are headed. You have to know where they're from and what adversities they've had to face over the years. What sports did they play growing up? What kind of recruit were they? All these different things factor in. Then, of course, the analysis. There's NFL verified testing information for almost 2,000 players in there. So take a lot of pride in this being something you can't get anywhere else. This is, if you want to know more about the draft, this is the one thing that you need to have on draft weekend.
No doubt. And we've spent so much time on the earlier rounds, and you're the guy that we can go to and be like, all right, let's talk about a little bit deeper prospects because you've done all this. But I have to ask real quick. You said it's 18 months in the making, which is over a year, which means I would like to ask you, how far into 2025's The Beast are you already?
Well, and honestly, it's not on purpose. It's just inadvertently you can't help but pick up information for next year, whether you're talking to a coach and you're talking about a player and then someone else pops up and all of a sudden, okay, I'm jotting down notes for this guy, or you're watching tape and you're watching a certain player, but hey, who's this number 12? I need to, play 36 on this tape. I need to make sure I go back and watch it. So inadvertently, I always end up picking up a lot of notes and different things on players for next year, which is really helpful. Get you a little bit of a head start. But I try to take a step back in May, and then June 1st is when I really dive right back in, get that base for the upcoming season, the players to know, all these things, start building that database. So yeah, it really is a long process that, and I maximize every day that I can, because it really takes that long to get this all done in time for the draft.
What's your favorite element of The Beast? There's so many different cool little nuances. Obviously, the players, the profiles. Is it the advanced metrics? Is it what is the thing that you're like, man, I'm really proud that this is in there, and this is something that we really had to work hard to get going?
Well, yeah, the NFL verified testing information is huge. The combine.
Is that from the GPS?
Oh, well, there is some of that in there, but okay. I think the combine stuff is public. A lot of people can get that, but all the pro day information, good luck trying to find the 10-yard splits from Washington's pro day, and that's not a really public information, but if you want to know that, it's all in here. And so, like I said, almost 2,000 players, their NFL verified testing information is in there. So if you want to know arm length, it's in there. If you want to know the exact height and weight, instead of just going by the school and the guy being 2 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier, I'll tell you what it really is in the guide. So that would be number one, just because this is the only place you're going to find that information. But then also the background information. It's fun to learn about these players, and it's fun to give them, not only them but their families a little bit of love because it's a group effort with a lot of these guys, growing up, and parents having to really dedicate their lives to the training and all the sports that they have played over the years. And so to shine just a little light on the families and the process, what it's taken to get to the doorstep of the NFL, and learn about these guys as people more so than just the players. There's a lot of joy in doing that for me. So learning the backstories of each one of these players is a lot of fun, and something that I definitely, again, to find out where they're headed, to find out where they've been and what they've had to do to get to this point. And that's a lot of fun for me to share those stories.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, it's really fantastic. One of the things that makes the Beast such a great source material. But the thing that gets me is like, how do you get all the pro day information? Like, as you said, there's like 2,000 guys in there. Are you talking NFL teams? Do you send people out? Are you out there with a stopwatch and writing numbers down? Like, because I've tried to get it and it's really hard to get. Right. So how do you do it?
Yeah, it's all from teams. It's all from teams. It's as much as I would love to attend pro days myself, I just don't have the time, because the month of March doesn't happen for me. It's 18-hour days of just trying to get this thing done, and getting the pro day information from teams, the sources that I trust that I've built over the years. It's a key part of this because again, a lot of guys don't work out at the combine, or they do work at the combine, but maybe it's not the numbers they want, so they retest at the pro day. And so just comparing the two, and the guys that weren't invited, every year there's about 35 players that are drafted that were not invited to the combine. So making sure we're trying to find out who those guys are, and a lot of times it's based on the testing. If you want to learn, a lot of the 30 visits that teams have, a lot of the times those are non-combine guys, because you have to get the medical information. And with the combine guys, you got that at the combine. With the non-combine guys, you have to bring them in on a 30 visit to make sure you get the medicals right, or it's hard to draft that player. So, that's where the pro day information is really important, because that's how a lot of teams base who they're going to be talking to based off of the testers. That's what a lot of the late risers that we hear about in the draft process, guys that get drafted fifth round, sixth round, seventh round, the guys that ran a 4.3 at the pro day that nobody was really talking that much about. So yeah, the pro day information is definitely a source of pride for me.
All right, so that's a little background on the Beast. Let's dive into the prospects themselves. And I will say this on the front end. I think we're going to skip the quarterback conversation at 2, because Dane, you, me, and Logan have talked about that ad nauseum, nonstop for months. So obviously, listeners to this podcast know what Logan and I think. If you want more from Dane on the quarterback stuff, you can obviously read his reports in the Beast, but also hear him talk about it on the Athletic Football Show with our pals Robert Mays and Nate Tice. So that leads to 36 and 40 next for the Commanders in the second round. And I think our big question right now that we're kind of pondering, that certainly Adam Peters and his crew are pondering, is, do you stay or do you move back into the back end of the first round? Theoretically, probably for an offensive tackle, maybe for an edge. If you're considering those situations, where's the drop off for you at those two positions? Where if I tell you you can get up to the early 20s, late teens, where it's worth it for you to do that for which players that you think will be available?
Yeah, and the tackles, we're going to see those guys fly off the board. We'll see 5 or 6 go in the top 25. And so it depends on what the grades are for the Commanders. Do they believe a guy like Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma is a plug-and-play tackle and someone they can trust to be the guy for them? Some teams are encouraged. Some teams are optimistic. Other teams, they're not. They see a project, a guy it's going to take time. Yeah, the ability is great, but it's going to take some time. And so if you're the Commanders, is that someone you're willing to trade up for? Kingsley Suamataia from BYU, he's been a popular guy with 30 visits as teams try to figure him out. He's a young player. He just turned 21 years old, third-year sophomore, has a lot of ability. He's a former 5-star player, but he was at Oregon. Then he had to transfer to BYU because he had a tough time being away from family. So and that was just 2 years ago. So, okay, is he going to be okay going to DC and being away from family and, being in an NFL locker room? Like, is he suited for that? So teams are trying to figure out that part of it, just the mental makeup and the aspect of being a professional. And is he ready for that stage? And do we feel like he's worthy trading up for? So the tackles, I do think there's a drop off after, maybe the top 5. And then that's where you come with the question marks with Tyler Guyton, with Asua Matia. But at the same time, these guys aren't going to last. These offensive tackles, they might not last you in the second round. They might not even be there. So is every team, not every team, but most teams need tackle depth. And so it's a position that is top heavy this year. I think there is a pretty sizable drop off once you get to day 2. So I can understand if the Commanders look at this and say, yeah, we could maybe just draft Patrick Paul in the second round, the tackle from Houston, who obviously has brothers on the team. There's a connection there. But if we really want to maximize the player we're going after at tackle at this spot, we need to trade up. So they need to look at their options here and see if one of these tackles were to fall, and then see what it would cost, because it might be worth it in their situation.
So you mentioned you have a top 5. Would you mind giving us your top 5 offensive tackles? And then, how do you stack those top 5, compared to the Roger Rosengartners, the Patrick Pauls, the, Amadijis from Yale? Where do they fit? Blake Fisher from Notre Dame. Some of those guys are pretty good football players, but I think the Commanders are looking for something very specific at left tackle, which I think is one of the reasons why you probably want to move up. But I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the dichotomy and the relationship between those two groups or tiers of players.
Yeah, for me, Joe Alt from Notre Dame, the top player this year, I think he'll be off the board somewhere in the top 7 picks. Olu Fashanu from Penn State, local kid for you guys in DC. He's right there in that mix to be a top 12 pick. J.C. Latham from Alabama, maybe the strongest player in the draft. He's my 3rd tackle. Talise Fuaga from Oregon State, he's my 4th tackle. Some teams have him at guard. There's some split opinions on him, but he's just a really solid player. Amarius Mims from Georgia is my 5th tackle, and I wouldn't be surprised 3 years from now he's the best player, best tackle out of this group. He has so much ability, 6'7", 3/4, 340 pounds, just scratching the surface of what he can be. 8 starts to his name. So there's the body of work's not there, but if you're going to bet on traits and bet on ability, you're going to like Amarius Mims. He's just a rare dude. And then that's where we get to Tyler Guyton and Kingsley Suamataia, Patrick Paul, and then we get to that next tier, which I think is a Roger Rosengarten. I've heard the late first round love, maybe early second round with Roger Rosengarten. It's a little rich for me. I get it. And Rosengarten, he was a player that went to Washington as a left tackle, and then when Michael Penix transferred to Washington, they talked to him about, hey, let's shift you over to right tackle. Want to protect me because Michael Penix is a lefty. We want to protect his blind side. So let's move you to right tackle. And he had a really good last 2 years as a starter. Started every game, 28 games. There were some bumps in the road. He is a light player. When he plays with high pads, that's where things kind of fall apart for him. But he is a good athlete. He moves well. It's just a matter of consistency with him, with the mechanics, with the body posture. And I think he's going to get there. He's a younger player. Blake Fisher, another young player, literally just turned 21 years old a couple weeks ago. But good size, 6'5" 3/4, 310 pounds. You like the ability that he has. It's just, okay, he's inexperienced. And yeah, he did start at right tackle each of the last 2 years, but there are times where there are certain games, I think it was the Louisville game, you watch that tape and they had to take him off the field because it was just so up and down. You couldn't trust him out there. So he's a young player. And if you throw him out there from week 1, you're going to have to live with the ups and downs, with the hiccups. And so obviously if you're drafting a tackle on day 2, you're sacrificing something, right? And a lot of times with offensive tackles, you're sacrificing experience. And it's going to take a little bit longer with those guys that maybe they're not as finished products when you talk about a Rosengarten or Blake Fisher. So, it's it's something where tackles usually get overdrafted because that's just supply and demand. You have to do that. And wouldn't be surprised at all if we see that more and more of that this year because, again, it's a top-heavy position this year.
What about for edge? A guy that Logan has had circled for a long time is Darius Robinson. Is kind of a great fit for what Dan Quinn wants, the toughness, the nasty streak, all that, what we saw at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, a lot of folks have drawn the line between what Micah Parsons was in college, wearing the same jersey at Penn State as Chop Robinson, because they're both physical freaks that went to Penn State. Obviously, there's a lot of differences between the two, but are either of those players that maybe if you're Washington, you would consider back end of the first round for? Or do you think that those two guys could last till 36 and kind of where's your drop off on the edge guys?
I think Robinson could get there. He's a unique player because he's 6'5", 285 pounds. He was a defensive tackle as an underclassman, and he thought about coming out last year. He would have been probably a 5th round pick if he came out last year, but he goes back to school and they move him to more of an edge role and he blows up. 14 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. Kirby Smart's talking about how, hey, we just have to figure out how to block number 6, and then we're good. Darius Robinson was the guy on that Missouri defense that's standing out as, okay, if we stop him, we've got a chance. And so he's the first guy you want off the bus. Looks the part. He's powerful, strong hands. He's a good athlete, not a great athlete. His 40 wasn't good, but his short area stuff was good enough. 35-inch vert. You can see that explosiveness. Had a good Senior Bowl. Looked really good in one-on-ones. And so you think about, he's a base end who's going to kick inside on passing downs maybe. There's a lot to like about Darius Robinson, but there is a chance I think he's there early second round. It's funny you mentioned Chop Robinson, that Penn State connection. Adisa Isaac, the other Penn State pass rusher, that's the guy that I think maybe would make more realistic sense for the Commanders. He's actually the guy that led the team in tackles for loss, led the team in sacks. Team captain, there's a lot to like about him. A Brooklyn kid, he's good size, 6'4.5", 250 pounds, really good athlete, tested well. You see, I don't think the pass rush plan is as thought out as maybe you would like. And so, there are things that he needs in terms of his sequencing, in terms of setting up moves. There are some things that he needs to work out. But, man, the flashes are really exciting. And you think about, okay, if our coaches get our hands on this guy and really iron out some of those wrinkles and, he could be a really solid disruptor for us off the edge. So Adisa Isaac from Penn State, that's the name that I think makes a ton of sense for the Commanders on day 2.
What about a guy like Marshawn Nealon there from Western Michigan? I've enjoyed his preseason, his pre-draft process. I've enjoyed his film, like he just plays with his hair on fire. Do you think he's good value there at 36 or 40?
I do, absolutely. I think he finished 32nd, I believe, on my board. So a guy
really?
that if he went in the first round, I wouldn't be shocked. Because every year we have 27, 28 guys that we know are going first round. And it's just that last 5 that we have to figure out.
Yeah,
and
right.
Sometimes we have surprises. And if we had a surprise this year, Marshawn Nealon might be one of those guys that could sneak in there. He plays the right position. Obviously, he's 6'3", 267 pounds, good sized player. And he, you mentioned some of the splash plays that he put on tape. You watch the Eastern Michigan tape and you're just, okay, well, this guy's awesome. That was one of the best pass rushing tapes that I watched all year. Marshawn Nealon's a lot of fun. Probably more likely he goes in the second round. That's the best chance. And so I think, he should be right there in that mix to be off the board in the top 40 picks. Because again, I think this pass rusher position, it falls off. There are some good pass rushers this year. You think about Dallas Turner and Jared Verse and Liatu Latu, Chop Robinson. But after that, it really does fall off a little bit. And it's like tackle. If you don't get your guy early, you're probably not going to be happy with the guys that are left for you around later. So Marshawn Nealon, you take him top 40. I don't think anyone's looking at that and saying, oh, yeah, that's a reach. No, that's a good player you're adding to the mix.
Well, quick question. So obviously it does fall off a little bit, but are there any guys later rounds at edge that you're like, man, this guy has some traits. This guy could get some stuff done. I think about Kamara from Colorado State, maybe in the third round there is some pass rush value. Is there anybody else that you're like, this is a guy that maybe, you know, has like a situational role to start, but could develop into something more.
Jonah Ellis from Utah.
Look at
that's
you.
The guy. Yeah, he's a good player, and obviously he's got the bloodlines. His dad, Luther, former first-round pick, played in the league for a decade. Jonah's been kind of out of sight, out of mind because he had the shoulder injury late in the year in November, and so no Senior Bowl. He was invited to he went to the Shrine Bowl, but wasn't able to participate. No combine. He had a very late pro day, and he blew it up. He had a 6.69 3-cone at 243 pounds. So that's the question: is okay, 6'2", 243 pounds, a little bit undersized. You worry about some of the stuff in the run game, but you project him with that burst, with that upfield motor. You project him as kind of that sub-package player who to start, and then hopefully over the course of the next 2 years, he's working himself into a starting role at that edge rusher position. I think the high-end, realistic high-end projection for him is maybe like an Alex Highsmith with the Steelers. But again, I think that's probably high-end. That's the most optimistic look at a guy like Jonah Ellis. But at the very least, he's going to be a productive sub-package role type of pass rusher. So yeah, he makes sense. More small school guy, Jalix Hunt from Houston Christian. 6'4", 250. He a former safety at Cornell, transfers to Houston Christian. I mean, awesome story. And an awesome kid. I mean, he works at this. He wants to be great. You love the mentality. Very coachable. He has the body type he's going to continue to grow into, and he's a really good athlete. So somewhere in that third, fourth round, I think we'll see Hunt come off the board as a more of an investment than right out of the box going to be making plays. But 3 years from now, I think a team will be pretty happy they invested in a guy like this.
That's the kind of thing, too, with Dan Quinn and the staff that he brought in. You're like, yeah, you make investments, Dan Quinn. Your track record's pretty good in terms of the ROI. Receiver, obviously, there doesn't seem to be a fall off. I mean, obviously, the top three guys are incredible. There are tiers here, but there just seems to always be a next tier of guy where there is good football players in this draft. And I think one of the things that we've kind of been toying with for the Commanders specifically is there is a receiver for every body type. Which one do the Commanders even want? Because depending on what you think of Jahan Dotson, is he a slot? Is he a guy that's better off outside? Is Terry better off being moved to more of a Z role versus the X that he's been playing most of his career? You could really go any direction. So if I phrase it to you this way, Dane, which of those is strongest in rounds 3 and later? So if I want to get any type of receiver, but I want the best one I can get rounds 3, 4, 5, what kind of receiver is going to be showing up there?
Probably more slots than outside receivers. Talking about your Jalen McMillan from Washington, Malik Washington from Virginia, those type of players. But I think some outside players as well. Brendan Rice from USC could be in that mix. Javon Baker from Central Florida. Jalen Polk, Washington, possibly. He's kind of in that late second, early third round mix. Jermaine Burton from Alabama is really a wild card. He has, you could argue, as top 50 talent, but he's probably not going to go until late third, early fourth is be my guess. Teams are all over the map on Jermaine Burton because of he's just a different guy, and he's not going to be for everybody. But he's a talented player, and just the production was up and down for him. But again, you isolate. If you watch the 10 best plays from Jermaine Burton, easy first round pick, right? I mean, this guy's going to go. But the body of work just isn't quite there. But I think teams will be more than happy to take that chance at certain points. For some teams, that'll be the third round. Other teams might be the fourth round. But your original point, I think, is so true. Wide receiver. And I'm convinced the rest of our lives, wide receiver is going to be a strong position. Like it's just how it's going to be. Because when you're a young kid growing up, if you're not a quarterback, you're going to be a receiver because that's how the NFL, modern day football, that's how you score points and how you make plays, and you want the ball in your hands. And so, wide receiver, I think, is going to be a strong position moving forward. But with that said, So, I guess based off what I said, you could say, oh, well, I'll wait on that receiver and it's going to stretch. I'll get him later. But these guys are going to go fast. And we might see 14, 15 receivers go in the first 2 rounds. We're going to see plenty in the top 100. So while I do think you could feel comfortable waiting to the 3rd round, 4th round, and still getting a guy that you like, it's not a position that you want to put off too long because these guys are going to fly off the board.
So I got 2 questions. One, I know our fans are really excited about Johnny Wilson. Obviously, the measurables are insane. I think the route running nuance for a guy that size is pretty good. And he feels like a guy that could maybe project to like an outside receiver at some point in his career after a developmental period in the slot. What are your thoughts on him? And then who is your 5th wide receiver? 5th wide receiver, because I've been having many struggles at night trying to classify that 5th spot. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Wilson's so unique because he's his pro day, he was 6'6", 236 pounds. How many receivers do we have in the NFL today that are that size at the receiver position? There's not many guys like that. And so that's why for some teams he's a tight end on their draft board. That's how he is stacked on their board itself, and that's how they envision using him, just because we don't see many guys that have these measurables. But at the same time, he tested like a wide receiver. He moves like a wide receiver. I don't think he's not elusive or anything like that, but and I wouldn't call him, something about his route running that kind of bugged me was how loose he is as a route runner. So he's so long with his arms and his legs that they're kind of all over the place. And he has quick feet, so he can settle down, break off routes. He can create these little pockets of separation. He just needs to be a little bit more consistent there. He has obviously a huge catching radius with an 84-inch wingspan, but not always consistent finishing that ball. Like this past year, every year of his career, he had more drops than touchdown catches. And that's always a red flag for me. Okay, you have this size, you're over 6'6", you're 235 pounds. Why weren't you more of a red zone presence? And sometimes it's just the offense, and they, once you get inside the 10, they're just running the ball, or they're doing this or doing that. So it's not always on him, but it's always just kind of curious to me. Why did you have more drops than touchdowns every single year of your 4-year career in college? So I do like Johnny Wilson, not quite as much as maybe some other people. I don't see him as a top 100 pick, but I can understand if a team looks at that and say, look, these guys, a guy built like this with 10-inch hands, over 35-inch arms, has a 4.52 40-yard dash. These guys aren't walking down the street, so we're going to take our chance with this guy. I can understand why some team would come to that conclusion. For me, that 5th receiver, I'm going with Ladd McConkey, just because I think of it this way. If I'm a defensive coordinator, who don't I want to see on the other team? Who don't I want to prepare for? And outside of those top 4 guys, it's Ladd McConkey for me, because he is so shifty. He's so his ability to uncover at will in different ways with his route running, with his quickness. It would just give me fits as a defensive coordinator, trying to prepare for that, trying to stop that. Now, I do worry about the size. He's under 6 foot, under 185 pounds. Missed a good chunk of this past season with a back injury and ankle injury. That's the biggest worry I have with him. So the doctors, the trainers, they come into play with this evaluation. If I'm in the war room with my team and we're presenting the player to the room, we're watching film, trainer's coming in and he's going through what's going on with him physically with his body, and we have to make a decision there. But if you told me he's going to average 15, 16 starts a year for me over the life of his rookie contract, I'd have no trouble taking Ladd McConkey in the first round and feeling really good about what he's going to bring to my offense.
Feels like we just got started, Dan, and yet our time is up. This is the nature of this. There's just so many guys, so many positions, and especially with the Commanders having 6 picks in the top 100. There's so many guys to talk about. But luckily, we have the Beast that we can go read for much more information from you. We really appreciate your time again, and we'll be looking forward to what you and Robert and Nate and everybody at The Athletic is doing leading up to and through draft day. Thanks again for joining us here on Take Command.
Hey, anytime. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.